I try to approach everything that happens in gaming with a more nuanced lens. I'm hesitant on joining in on any dogpiling because although I'm all for critiquing a bad practice and constructive criticism, sometimes I can't help but feel some discussions lack that and just dunk on a game for some self-centered or petty reasoning. It feels like it happens more than one would initially think, and it's caused me to go apart from gaming a little bit, but despite that, I've still been eager to try and add something new to this discussion, and maybe try and get it through to gamers that things don't have to be like this. And then Mixtape came out. I'm back in the
The compact disc delivers crisp, high-fidelity audio in a portable form factor.
Mixtape is a recently released indie game developed by Beethoven and Dinosaur, famously award-winning Artful Escape, and published by Annapurna Interactive, who have a whole collection of indie games that I won't go into. The game is a short story about three teens, Slater, Cassandra, and Rockford, reminiscing about their high school years on their final night together before Rockford leaves to be a music supervisor in New York. It's a coming-of-age story that should only take about 3 hours to finish, but it's easy to tell from how Rockford is written that this game is very obviously concentrated from someone's passion for the music of the time. It's the type of game I like to call a feels game, games that have an emphasis on story, so keep the raw gameplay light, but not as minimal as, say, a visual novel. You experience the story through memories of the group's time at high school found through items in each of the teens' rooms. Memories include trying to evade police after a party, finding a secret house in the woods, experiencing an extremely messy first kiss that definitely won't come back to bite us in the future, and more, which are infinitely less disgusting. Also, did you know that foreshadowing is a literary device? The gameplay is varied between memories, both in how the game is controlled and how much gameplay there is. It is admittedly uneven at times, like there's a part where you're just listening to Freak by Silverchair and the minigame is to press buttons to lock out, while others, like the baseball one, require a bit more thought and input. Most others are a blend of the two where you just get to mess around, like with the slushy machine. However, I'd argue the status of the game as a so-called feels game allows this gameplay to have a smaller factor in the overall quality than how it rubs off on the player, which is where the music comes in. Each memory has its own piece of music meant to invoke the nostalgia of the time, which combined with the gameplay feels intended to capture less of what that moment is, but more of how that moment feels. Subtextually and metatextually, it's a mixtape built on the nostalgia of that era. The songs chosen make up a mixtape of the period, while the moments in the game make up a mixtape of teenage life in that period. On the other hand, it's also a story about friendship, growing up, and ultimately letting go of that era. While there are several moments in the story where Rockford addresses the player with the facts of the music and how they go with that moment, there are also moments where she states how the world feels without the music.
Most of the time, if I don't have music on, I get the panic.
What's the panic?
Like, time feels like it's drifting by. I feel like I'm wasting something.
The fantastical nature of many of these sequences are meant to encapsulate that feeling before slamming back down into the real world. Further along the story, when Cassandra blasts Rockford for ruining the group's road trip plans, when she replaces her with Jenny fucking Goodspeed, as she's referred to in the game, who Rockford hates, she doesn't have a track to go with it.
Long stretches of electric piano, because I honestly don't know what song to play.
Have fun hanging out with Camille Cole.
She has to face the reality of her actions. This friction and the other conflict with Cassandra's cop father don't come until quite late into the story, but the ultimatum of this conflict is evaluating the friction between staying together with your friends and letting go to follow your passion, in this case, to be a music supervisor in New York. In the end, Rockford lets go, accepting that their bond exists beyond the mixtape of raw moments in the game. When Cassandra is able to stand up to her father at the end, it's a great moment that shows the payoff of this bond. It shows that those moments scattered across those 3 hours matter through what comes of them in return, and I think the haptic feeling of those moments portrayed through the gameplay is what I feel makes it matter as a video game. This stuff couldn't be done if it wasn't a video game. I don't know if this game will be enhanced by having nostalgia for that period, or even nostalgia for that flux of teenage life in general. Speaking personally, my most crucial teenage years were defined by the pandemic and all the fallout and loss that came with that. Never went to parties, never kissed anyone. I was mostly just focused on nerdy things with other nerds, and despite not being together anymore, I still think about those moments fondly. Also, if there are any Feels games that cater to that nerd audience, please let me know. But yeah, as far as Mixtape is concerned, it's a good game that induces a lot of feelings in its short run time, but with its limited innovations, I think it'll have a place with those who open their mind to it. People online have been tearing apart this game for the past few weeks.
Somewhere right now, a 38-year-old man is crying on his couch. He just finished a 3-hour video game about teenagers shoplifting and getting drunk in a parking lot, and he thinks he had some kind of spiritual experience.
Funnily enough, I did have a spiritual awakening recently from another gameplay-like video game I want to make a video on, but not this one, so you're not too far off, I guess. So Mixtape has been on the receiving end of a lot of discourse, as with many games this year, but on a more intense level that, if you go as deep as I did, you'll find is heavily rooted less in fact and more in conspiracy. A brief disclaimer that you're entitled to your own opinion anyway, and not every take on Mixtape is like this. It seems to have started when IGN gave the game a 10 out of 10. Perfect score, I guess. Other review sites not counting in this situation, as we all know IGN is the bright on games journalism for giving Mouse PI a 6 out of 10. Conspiracies have been going around that the publisher Annapurna has been astroturfing the reviews, paying off review sites to review the game positively, which is a very out there claim indeed that backs up the perception that this is just one big Gamergate conspiracy indicated by sworn journalism that the drama channels continue to back up. Additionally, the game has come under fire for just being published by Annapurna. Disregarding that history of notable indie games, on the surface it shares the leftovers of Expedition 3's discourse back in December, gatekeeping the definition of indie, or in this case even a video game, to void anything that relies on the publisher system, hence it become an industry plant. Regardless of the fact that some indies have to rely on this system to get the money they need in the first place, and to gatekeep this hard is to do away with the context that they only published the game and the developers themselves are literally working outside that damned AAA studio system. By this logic, All in the Blind Forest should not be played by anyone because Xbox made it. It's worth noting though that on the slightly more civilized end of the spectrum, the CEO Megan Ellison has come under fire for her presumed connections, mainly from her father, Paramount and Oracle CEO Larry Ellison, to the Trump administration and the war in Gaza. Evidence of these connections are not certain to me, and discussion of these issues are way out of the scope of this video, but they're worth bringing up to encourage doing your own evaluation. There's an Aftermath article linked in the description which fleshes out and rationalises a lot of the main talking points, which will likely allow you to come to your own conclusion on the more complex parts, since I don't see myself as the one to tell you how to process these elephants. But there's a paragraph of the article that sticks out to me, mainly because of how telling it is of Mixtape's situation. Quote, "Drive-by arguments around the game and the ills it supposedly represents have given rise to posts and videos with millions of views. Mixtape is against all odds, given that it's an indie-coded game that aspires more to vibes than groundbreaking mechanics or any sort of genre-redefining experience, the talk of the town. But today's internet is more fragmented than ever, so the Mixtape discourse is really more like dozens of towns, each with their own dialects seeped in unspoken histories, screaming past each other in an attempt to finally pin down where it all went wrong. In other words, it's another week in the video game industry." End quote. That last sentence puts together a lot of the feelings I had when I wanted to make this video about Mixtape, however writing it ended up creating a large block in my head. It was miserable to scroll through so many Reddit threads of varying levels of civility and dwindling sanity. At the same time, I didn't really have that much to say about Mixtape other than it's a good and relatively harmless game that obviously comes from a place of nostalgia and passion for music. So I switched gears and started thinking deeper. Is this the content I want to make? Just adding fuel to the fire of a soul-destroying dunking and calling out culture to try and elevate myself as a person, even though in return it makes me feel like shit? And that's what I wanted to focus on today, this drama sphere around Mixtape and what it says about how we talk about games in general. Again, it's going to share a lot of DNA of the conversation I intended to have about Highguard, but with a scenario that I actually support rather than you awful live service games, slop, etc, etc. When talking about the state of modern game discourse, we can't talk about it without bringing in the revival of Gamergate. Gamergate was a horrific harassment campaign originating in the mid-2010s which took aim at those wanting more progressive attitudes towards video games. In other words, gatekeeping what it means to be a gamer and by extension what a video game is. It's also worth noting that the game that spurred on this initial wave of Gamergate was Depression Quest, which, similar to Mixtape, had accusations of astroturfing and just didn't fit into the conservative idea of a video game. There are more layers to it than that, but for the sake of remaining at least slightly hopeful for gaming, we'll define it as that. It's why you're unlikely to find a conversation here that leaves the game as a not for me, or explains why, despite this game being far from what these drama YouTubers would specifically like, is being dunked on by them. It's a shared conservative-ish worldview of what a video game should be that Mixtape doesn't seem to fit at all in this case. When journalists give higher scores to Mixtape but lower scores to, say, Crimson Desert, which is a common reputation, although I can't really say I know much about that game, it's likely for different reasons, for different subjective criteria, because they're different types of games. Let's move away from wars on journalism for a bit and look at some more set-in-stone reasoning. The conservative worldview that limits definitions of games, indies, and 10 out of 10 is not entirely rooted in the slop you'd expect. In my scraping of Reddit to try and get what went wrong with this game's perception, there felt like a lot of generalization that this was just another anti-woke pushback that you see in so many discussions about games nowadays that could easily be swept under the rug. But there were also a high number of posts that went a little bit like, a game with non-existent gameplay and a god-awful story but an amateurish voice acting ended up getting super high scores with critics because the CEO of Oracle, father of the game's director, gave them money. Because it's not a good game at all in comparison to actual good games like the new Resident Evil or Crimson Desert. Because it's not an indie game whatsoever, it's funded by the 6th richest person in the world, by the game developer being owned by its daughter, it's had an absolute pile of cash thrown at it, on top of all media and influencers having cash and goodie bags thrown at them. It's pure industry plant stuff. Mistake has narcissist and unhinged daughter blackmailing her father who only wants what's good for her and a music snob lesbian. It's a game where the only gameplay is 2 underage kids sexually tongue-kissing and people are calling it Game of the Year. This is the scene they're referencing, by the way. I actually tried pressing people in other discussions about this scene to see if it was actually a point of contention, and turns out it is, which I don't know what to tell you, man. So, no, this game's discourse is not one-sided, it's worse. It's every drama-brained fragment of the internet converging on a single target they would have never seen or played otherwise. It's the internet equivalent of the climax to the Flash movie where different universes are converging onto one, and half of them are made up out of nerd properties that should have probably stayed dead. Does that make sense? Kinda. Basically, it's a mutation of the same phenomena I revolved my Highguard video around, where the drama becomes the perception of the game, lines are drawn, and the content is churned out. If we consider Mixtape as art on the same level as other games of its type, then the drama brain disregards the things that make the art to fit into that worldview of games. In a content machine like YouTube, they're not art, they're rather weapons. Weapons that fuel the fake outrage again and again and again, and you know the rest. This type of content is very prevalent on sites like YouTube, so it's likely that you see this content a lot. Not surprisingly, really. If we look at channels which have a chokehold on search results for modern gaming, video game industry, etc., they pretty much gain the algorithm in all the ways you can. I mean, who wouldn't click on this? Don't answer that this time. I don't aim to defend the game's worthy of criticism that just happened to end up in a similar position. Despite my stance on high guard, I don't defend live service games for reasons previously stated. The problem with such content is that it gets tiring being served the same narrative over and over and over again. To prove that this discourse is part of this ongoing cycle, I did a small experiment, and this might sound kinda crummy. I don't like calling out others unless it feels like it adds to the video, but while writing it, anytime YouTube recommend me videos shitting on the game, I would mark down the channel, cite it here, and just have a peek at their other content. And I got similar results. They were focused on drama, they had identical perceptions and narratives, it just felt like the same type of video looking in general, and if you're as good as pattern recognition as I am, you'll begin to see this kind of pattern in content like this. Videos that feel less like genuine game discussion and more focused on continuing that cycle, whatever that game may be. Hell, this is the feeling I got while trying to make that previous script, which is more focused on Mixtape itself. Well, it's productive content to call out videos like this, flat out boost a false narrative. Is it perpetuating the same cycle that I also want to call out? When I talk about drama brain, this isn't a sweep of everyone who watches drama content are morons, but when one becomes consumed by the drama and that's all they become revolved around, especially in video games where there seems to be a new one every bloody week, and you get the indulgence seen in the channels that revolve themselves around it. It's why I'm hesitant to pin the entire drama on a single fragment of the internet. As referenced in the article sourced earlier, there's many factors contributing to the situation. From my experience, cringe culture, purity culture, Gamergate, capitalism, Zionism, and many others. However, this division roots back to that drama sphere because many of these individual branches create drama surrounding other games that end up poisoning the atmosphere of overall games discussion, which it certainly felt like it's been like that all year. Pragmata is probably the main one that comes to mind, where a large proportion of its fandom, specifically right-wing ones, crashed out over the fact that they couldn't date the literal child you supervise throughout the game, creating the dominant perception that Pragmata is a game for weirdos, to put it in an algorithm-friendly way. Slay the Spire 2 was review-bombed on Steam for having Anita Sarkeesian in the credits, a prevalent activist and target of Gamergate, and therefore causes most gamers to explode on sight. Star Fox, take a look for yourself. Nintendo discussion is already in the shitter, but come on. I don't know much about Crimson Desert or Saros, but I assume they've been dragged kicking and screaming into the culture war end. I read something about Saros' ending having a storyline involving a cucked man being betrayed and left by his wife for her crispy. Okay, now I need to play Saros if that what happens. How much does it cost? God damn it. And when it seems that so much of game discussion is rooted in this division, it's easy to have fatigue from the such. You can indulge in discourse all you want, though I have seen people, YouTubers I watch, succumb to the pull of the drama and henceforth destroying their goodwill in the process. In my original script I was going to cite a comment where this guy talks about their roommate falling down the alt-right pipeline because of alt-right grift content, but ironically, the channel this came from, a victim to the drama brain, is now embroiled in several plagiarism scandals. Dodged a bullet there by not uploading in January. I'll not name them, but you know who you are. But to get back on topic, I can understand why things are like this. There's a heavy amount of exhaustion of the current gaming landscape. Despite previous thoughts, I understand fully that gamers are tired of live service games, are pissed off at game prices hitting $80 to $90 on Nintendo Switch 2, £67 to £75, and are pissed off at console prices hitting $900, £790. You get the bigger picture. So yeah, I get why this content is basically popular, and hell, I've been tempted multiple times to just throw my hands up and add to it and spend this video trashing everyone I possibly could, being a walking hypocrisy without nuance. Part of me feels like I'm adding to it now by talking about it rather than playing games. I want to play Mixtape, not argue whether it's slop or not. This dissonance between these pros and cons create a conflicting landscape in the branches of this cycle, which again isn't limited to just gaming. It's just the close example I can get to the mothership that is real-world division on the internet, because let's be honest, I can link many of these issues to that from my own experience. I mentioned earlier my vital teenage years being rained on by the pandemic, and if there was a mixtape made of those years, first of all, it would be as depressing as hell, but second, it would probably be made up of every single Nintendo discourse that happened that last year and culminated into the Free Melee movement in November of that year. If any drama in Nintendo fandom felt like it was a result of the build-up of a lot of small things in the fandom throughout the years, it was that one. But cut to 5 years later, and we're seeing the same cycles spawn from dissatisfaction with the Nintendo Switch 2, though now it's less of a powder keg and more like an explosion stuck in a time loop. Whenever a new event happens that can be taken as an L for the console, video gets made about how cooked the console is. When a new game comes out and it's not amazing or something, entire videos get made about how it's an absolute embarrassment, a travesty of a game, and how you're a bad person for buying it, and this is the extreme end of things, but honestly, mate, if you're telling people to uninstall a game, no, that's not a nice boundary to cross. But here's the thing, if we're sticking to this scenario of Nintendo, the Switch 2 did well despite everything that went down, I think this is a good point to begin to step away from Mixtape and slowly pivot our conversation towards the bigger picture. It's easier to forget, as our existence becomes more and more online, that internet spheres like this become as divided as they are because each of them provide their own echo chamber tailored by a slop-favouring algorithm. If user continues to watch content that perpetuates the same cycle of drama, that narrative produced by the cycle taking place on that branch becomes the dominant one in their mind, and before you know it, these videos aren't the search results anymore, they're the recommended page, or the For You page, or the watch whatever you want but tailored to you page. I can vouch for that because this happened to me on TikTok, where the worst parts of stuff I was fixating on at the time became everything I was force-fed for months, butchering my mental state before I realised that I needed to not do that anymore. This is how this content becomes the dominant perception amongst online communities, and I think this is what's allowed people's perceptions of gaming to become so conservative. We are given spaces where we aren't questioned on anything because we and others aren't given an environment that allows question, convergence of what we've just seen. I'm sure so many people are enjoying Mixtape or are hating its guts, but they will likely be buried by this drama, despite how manufactured it all feels. I didn't want to plague my mental state with more sloppy content for research, but considering the state of the game, I wouldn't be surprised if many of the loose citations catered to the lowest common denominator, just telling the gamers what they want to hear. The same narrative that gaming is dying or whatnot. And I think that's where things start to get lost a little bit, because I feel like if you consume more of this through internet discourse, the nuance starts to die out, and that's where the drama plane starts to develop. But here's what helps me rationalise all this. No internet drama sphere is final. Outside of the drama, you begin to see how some of these spheres become echo chambers. This is why I think the Nintendo Switch 2 situation unfolded the way that it did. After it came out that the console sold like hotcakes, users pushing for a boycott and a vote with your wallet situation turned into toxic infighting over who in Nintendo fandom was to blame for the failure of this boycott, even though most people who bought the console likely exist outside that state of Nintendo fandom online, and more in the casual space Nintendo consoles have been catering to for years. What did exist exclusively in that state was the boycott itself, because that perception doesn't exist in online spheres like this. The discourse and boycott was left to burn in a fire of outrage, and after a while it started to feel like less of a desire for fairer prices and more like a byproduct of that outrage. But by critiquing the outrage, am I defending those prices in the Switch 2? No, I didn't buy it because after weighing up my options I couldn't personally justify buying it for myself, those prices and the content it had at the time. I had my own real-world situation and influenced by buying off of that rather than what the outrage sells at all. That's the blind spot in that content, that maybe some people just enjoy video games regardless of the circumstances that surround them, and I think it's important to remember they exist, as to not be consumed by that doomerism. So is there hope? Well, none of this bad stuff is going away anytime soon, and I'm still too goddamn broke to buy a Nintendo Switch 2. I can't vouch for a complete disconnect from these issues entirely, because like it or not, the risk in making a video revolved around why you shouldn't care about drama and stuff is that someone could interpret it as a total advocation for escapism, the discouragement of facing the real world as a self-preservation tactic. I can vouch for a disconnect from these dramaspheres though, because they don't give anything to these situations. Even though we discussed that the online discussion surrounding the drama is not the bigger picture, the real, non-drama brained facts influencing it is. I can still go to the Nintendo section of my local games store, which, given the state of gaming, has been reduced to a rack in a sports shop near where I was filming stuff for a bigger video on escapism, and find the eye-watering prices of everything that touches the console. I'd also look to the PlayStation and Xbox sections and see similar situations. At the end of the day, you can't avoid the issues that plague gaming and frankly the world at large. Hell, there's bigger issues I'm not qualified to talk about in a dumb, stupid gaming video, and here I am focusing on how expensive this dumb hobby is in the current year. If you separate your perception of these issues from the online spaces they echo across, they no longer feel like drama, they feel like actual issues from the medium rather than some Mean Girls burn book. They only feel like drama when they're being thrown back and forth in online threads, or blown up in YouTube videos harvesting money from that outrage. The only way this drama can make one feel all doomerish is if the drama becomes one's only perception of these issues. Mixtape and Highguard have been my motivations to try and understand why the discourse works this way, but I'd be lying if I said they hadn't turned me into the fourth guy in this image right here. I try to get my thoughts out and understand why things work this way, and I end up coming out of it an emotional train wreck. I stand by it how I feel, and you can hate my guts for it, but it's rooted in just me wanting better for this industry as much as everyone else. But here's the thing, amongst this video, there was something I enjoyed writing more than this one and the previous one, and that's made it clear where my priority should be amongst all this. It was my upcoming Clair Obscur retrospective, which I'm going to advertise now, because I want to bring together my points this way, okay? I find it funny that while the gaming community was collectively crashing out about different stuff a month and a bit ago, I indulged in games I liked. I held up aspects of the medium I was into, wrote the Clair Obscur video to get all my feelings out about it, watched retrospectives that had the passion I needed. I cite Andrew Brewitt's Final Fantasy series as an inspiration for that one, by the way, you should go and watch that. I mentioned in passing on my other channel that the key to getting out of a crash out over the state of the world and the things you like is passion, and that passion for me is art. I'm aware that not everyone's gonna see games as art, and that's fine. Some people just use it as enjoyment, and they're valid to do so, as long as they don't indulge in drama, which, again, backs up everything I said in this video. But the ultimate flaw in this cycle of drama is that games that don't add anything to it, regardless of where it comes from, end up only being a part of it when it can be used for those arguments, or just discussed in a way that's like, oh, it defies this industry and something. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 has had its own drama, and as to not completely separate it from the conversation of pressing issues like AI, I do touch on it in the first act of the video. But that's not what the video is about. It's about how the game is really bloody good. It's a phenomenal achievement in the current landscape of gaming, with its amazing take on the turn-based RPG gameplay formula, beautiful world inspired by Belle Epoque France, and it's story with a spirit that kind of relates to this video. But I'll save that for when the video comes out, because I also have a spoiler-heavy and spoiler-free section for that. Yes, it's an indie game, and I know saying indie games will save us all is the cliche solution, but I'm not going to act like any game can have this much of an artistic edge to it. It's just easier to centre that artfulness on indies because they're someone's own vision and passion. The same passion that keeps one going in times where the narrative is that gaming is dying. And as mentioned at the start, the drama sphere is definitely more interested in upholding the same narrative and uses these games as weapons, upholding their narrative, missing the forest for the trees entirely. The fatal flaw in drama content is ultimately that they don't see the art in the content they cover. They are unable to see that because they and the ecosystem they contribute to cannot consider that. After all, what's true art if it just pushes the narrative people want to hear more? There's way more stuff to praise from recent times as well. I think my favourite gamer last year on an artistic level was Silksong, on a personal level Deltaloon. There's so much still out there for people to like, you just have to find it first, and yes, it won't be enough to take away from the raw issues, and at best just escapism from them, but we can't let this drama stop us from being passionate for something we like, and whether it's some industry plant that happens to be successful or a game made in somebody's basement, it's how we get through times of hardship, not arguing about what we hate, playing what we love. To loop all this back around to Mixtape, there's a moment I've been thinking about while editing the back end of this video. The Ferris Bueller-inspired running minigame near the end set to yesterday's hero. In a Kotaku interview, game director Johnny Galvatron explains the selection of this and the game's other tracks. This one he describes as one of the greatest unheard rock and roll songs. It fills me with great joy and energy. It's one of those songs I could listen to at any time. It's like top 10 choruses I wish I'd written. A few are left out in the interview, as I hear not all the tracks are actual licensed tracks, but some were done for the game, which you can criticise in good faith. But the article gives clarity to what I started this video on. The game is concentrated from someone's passion for the music of the time. Surrounding it is everything people have given this game shit for, from the cringe teenagers to the manufactured nostalgia, and I was well aware of the discourse by the time I got here in my own playthrough, but playing through this part myself, it felt like none of that mattered. I wasn't thinking about the discourse, I wasn't concerned with how little buttons I could press to complete the section. I was playing the game like a normal person. I rarely see anyone talk about this section online. I mean, I've only seen discussion of the kissing scene and I think that shows something. If you spend all your time arguing about games like Mixtape, you miss out on meaningful scenes like this, and you're never going to experience them this way unless you let go of what the internet latches you on to. Mixtape is a feels game. You're never going to get those feels on a Reddit thread or YouTube video. If you don't like it anyways, you don't have to indulge there either. Play games that you're into, no matter how pissed other games make you feel. Honestly, more people should experience scenes like this, or the running one from earlier. Maybe if it was in a game Chuds actually recommend, like Crimson Desert or something like that, it could accidentally make them feel something. Actually, that's not too bad of an idea. Mixtape introduces so many distinct pieces of gameplay that you could take one and put them in a more conservative game, and if the rest of the game fits the narrative those judges want to push, they'll be unable to criticize the game for that. Then we continue to infect these games with more mini-games like this, until before they know it, they'll be brainwashed into being more accepting of games like— When I walk down the streets! This video took way too long, I really need to stop making videos about internet drama.